We'll be heading across to the House of Commons very shortly because it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio, unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, as ever, Tim Shipman, the political editor of the Sunday Times, joins me. How are you doing, Tim?
Yeah, I'm good, Matt.
So right now in the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle is telling MPs about a minute's silence they're giving to Captain Tom. We expect probably he's likely to come up during PMQs today.
I imagine they will fall over themselves to come up with the most florid tribute possible, and quite right too. But it will be one of those occasions where the adjectives will flow.
Aside from that, what else do we also anticipate at PMQs today? It's one of those, we keep talking about this, the better the vaccine rollout goes, the slightly trickier things become for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer's got a couple of things he can go at, hasn't he? I mean, there's still concerns about foreign mutant vaccines, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, and now we've got variants of our own Kent variant, which resemble the South African and the Brazilian variants, which appear to be slightly more problematic in terms of transmission and potentially in terms of fatalities. And you've still got an argument going on in the cabinet over whether the borders should be properly shut to try and stop the spread of these new variants. So Starmer's had two goes at that in recent weeks. He might have another one. I mean, Brexit is clearly becoming a problem, but in terms of the issues on the Irish border, Michael Gove begging for more time today. You would think an opposition leader would go at that, but Starmer hasn't shown much inclination to go after Brexit.
Well, we'll see. Before, in fact, we get to Keir Starmer, we are going to hear from Theresa May. But first, Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Captain Sir Tom Moore, or Captain Tom as we all came to know him, dedicated his life to serving his country and others. His was a long life lived well, whether during his time defending our nation as an army officer, and last year bringing the country together through his incredible fundraising drive for the NHS that gave millions a chance to thank the extraordinary men and women of our NHS who've protected us in this pandemic. As Captain Tom repeatedly reminded us, please remember tomorrow will be a good day. He inspired the very best in us all, and his legacy will continue to do so for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, we now all have the opportunity to show our appreciation for him and all that he stood for and believed in. That's why I encourage everyone to join in a national clap for Captain Tom and all those health workers for whom he raised money at 6 p.m. this evening. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Okay, well, let's just jump in there. Where he takes a backbench question from Claire Hanna. Interesting that Boris Johnson. I mean, tomorrow will be a good day. That's a sort of Boris Johnson slogan at the best of times, anyway. Tim, and encouraging people to do a clap for Captain Tom tonight.
Well, Boris Johnson keen to sort of recapture that spirit of national togetherness that we saw in the first lockdown, which has been somewhat absent probably from more recent months. But, you know, Boris Johnson's got quite a lot of stuff in his locker this week that he can hit back at Keir Starmer with. You know, we've heard that the Oxford vaccine is pretty effective in one shot. It appears to get more effective if they leave the time between the two shots longer, which was a gamble the government took. That looks to have paid off. And of course, we've had all this shambles with the European Commission over the last few days, which have started to make some of the decisions Boris Johnson's government made last spring look quite good. And so his tail is up. And if he can recapture that sort of mood of togetherness, he's going to have a better year.
His poll ratings are up a little bit as well. I mean, we probably shouldn't read too much into that, but it is much as opponents of Boris Johnson might not like it, and his fiercest critics. But he doesn't seem, you know, you wouldn't have been surprised if the Tories were 10 points behind right now, given everything that's happened in the past 12 months, and that's just not happened.
No, that's right. I mean, though I have to say, I've never lost a tenner betting that Boris Johnson will bounce back. You know, it's been his way throughout, you know, the last couple of decades.
OK, before we get to Keir Starmer, we get to hear from Boris Johnson's predecessor. Theresa May is up in the House of Commons. But will she cause him more problems than the Labour leader? Let's take a listen.
Darkness and a true gentleman. I'm sure my right honourable friend is aware that my 10-minute rule bill would increase the maximum penalty for death by dangerous driving to life imprisonment. The policy and the bill have cross-party support. The policy has government support, the bill does not. The government says it will introduce the policy in its sentencing bill, of which we have seen, as yet, no sign. So, will the government now give government time to my bill to ensure this necessary change is put on the statute book as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and she's absolutely right to campaign for punishments that fit the crime, and we're therefore bringing forward exactly those changes, Mr. Speaker, and in our forthcoming sentencing bill, and our proposals, I believe, will go as far, if not even further, than those that she wants, by raising the maximum penalty for causing death by careless driving when under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and they will tighten the law for those who cause serious injury by careless driving.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join you and the Prime Minister in sending my condolences to the family of Captain Sir Tom Moore? He, perhaps more than anyone, embodied the spirit of Britain, and he will be sadly missed. And I welcome the initiative that the Prime Minister spoke of a clap this evening. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are also with the family of Maureen Colquhoun, the first openly lesbian MP and a great champion of women's rights. Mr. Speaker, let me pay tribute to our NHS and all of those on the front line who are delivering the vaccine. Today we're likely to hit 10 million vaccinations, which is remarkable. The biggest risk to the vaccine programme at the moment is the arrival of new variants, such as the South African variant. On that issue, the government's own scientist, Sage, said 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "Only a complete preemptive closure of borders or the mandatory quarantine of all visitors upon arrival can get close to fully preventing new cases or new variants." So pretty clear. So why did the Prime Minister choose not to do the one thing that Sage said could prevent new variants coming to the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, Sage did not recommend a complete ban, and they say that travel bans should not be relied upon to stop importation of new variants. But we do have, Mr. Speaker, one of the toughest regimes in the world, and anybody coming from South Africa not only has to do a test before they come here, but anybody coming from South Africa now, British citizens returning from South Africa now, will find themselves obliged to go into quarantine for 10 days, and they will have an isolations assurance agency checking up on them, and it is illegal now Mr. Speaker, to go on holiday in this country. It is illegal to travel from South Africa or all the countries on the current red list. And we will be going forward, Mr. Speaker, with a plan to ensure that people coming into this country from those red list countries immediately have to go into government-mandated quarantine hospitality.
Boris Johnson there responded to the question from Keir Starmer. It actually relates to a story broken by Stephen Swinford in the Times earlier this week. The SAGE committee had the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies had previously said that geographically targeted travel bans would not be enough to stop the strain, the arrival of new strains. And the scientists said the only way to get close to stopping them was either by closing the borders completely or introducing mandatory quarantine measures for everyone entering Britain, which, of course, Priti Patel and Matt Hancock were quite keen on, and Boris Johnson resisted. Tim Shipman.
Yeah, no, that's right. Wonderful dancing on the head of a pin answer from Boris Johnson there, which is the same line that Downing Street wheeled out after that Times story, which is that SAGE said the only way to do this is to close the borders. But they apparently stopped short of recommending that actually happen. And then Downing Street say, oh, well, it wasn't recommended, so we didn't do it. There are perfectly good arguments if you want to make them against that. But it's intriguing that Boris Johnson and Number 10 have not made those arguments. They've merely said that SAGE did not recommend it, when it's blindingly obvious that SAGE was saying, unless you do this, you potentially have problems. And anyone who knows Matt Hancock and the people around him will tell you that he's very concerned. The problem is lots of countries do not have an ability to test for coronavirus particularly effectively. And unless they have good tests, we are lucky that Brazil and South Africa do have those tests. And we know that they have a problem, so we can stop them. But there might be lots of countries where they're not testing. We don't know whether there are variants, and people can continue to come in. Now, there's a good economic argument that you need to keep trade going and keep borders open, but that's not the argument Boris Johnson made.
Well, let's go back and see if Keir Starmer has any more luck on his second question. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm intrigued by the Prime Minister's answer. I don't think he disputes what SAGE's view was, that only a complete closure or comprehensive quarantine of all arrivals will work. He doesn't seem to dispute that. He says it simply wasn't a recommendation. I would ask the Prime Minister to publish the full SAGE minutes so that we can see what was said in full, or if there's some other advice, perhaps publish that. Because the situation is this: we know the South African variant is spreading across England and measures are in place to try to deal with that. We also know that other variants are out there in other parts of the world. So is the Prime Minister really saying, just as a matter of common sense, is he saying that quarantining all arrivals would make no difference to fighting new variants of the virus? Or is he saying that quarantining all arrivals at the border would make a difference, but it's too difficult to do it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is the right honourable gentleman who only recently said that quarantine measures were a blunt instrument, and whose Shadow Transport Secretary said that quarantine should be lessened. We have one of the toughest regimes in the world, and I think when he calls for a complete closure of borders, or suggests that might be an option, Mr. Speaker, he should be aware that 75% of our medicines come into this country from the European continent, 45% of our food. 250,000 businesses in this country rely on imports. It is not practical completely to close off this country, as he seems to be suggesting. What is practical to do is have one of the toughest regimes in the world, and to get on with vaccinating the people of this country, which is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
what do you make of that, Tim Shipman? They're both arguing. It just feels like they're both digging in, but we're not really getting anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually just had a message from someone in government who points out that Starmer wants the SAGE papers published, which of course they will be in due course. And my source says it will also show that Starmer's plan doesn't work either, and is not wholly effective. So it looks like this argument is going to play out again when the SAGE papers are released. The trouble is the SAGE papers don't tend to get published for a few weeks after. They do
tend to have been overtaken by events. By the time we get the SAGE papers, that we're on to the next set of recommendations or decisions and that sort of thing. We should point out Boris Johnson keeps using this line about the Shadow Transport Secretary wanting quarantine measures to be relaxed. Jim McMahon, who is the Shadow Transport Secretary, has pointed out that was some 200 days ago in July last year, and things have moved on a little bit since then. But it's obviously a fact which has lodged itself in Boris Johnson's mind. Let's go back to get question 3 then from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, what he says about the Labour position is complete nonsense. He knows it. It's the 3rd of February 2021. With new variants in the country, our schools are shut and our borders are open. Everybody knows there are exceptions, whatever the quarantine regime. Everybody knows that. And that's not what this question is about. The position is this: 21,000 people are coming into this country every day. The Prime Minister's new border arrangements are still weeks away from being implemented and will only affect direct flights from some countries. We know from the first wave of the pandemic that only 0.1% of virus cases came from China, where we had restrictions, whereas 62% came indirectly from France and Spain, where there were no restrictions. Why does the Prime Minister think that the variants of the virus will behave differently and only arrive in the UK by direct flights?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he can't have it both ways. He simultaneously says that he wants the borders to be kept open for freight reasons or to allow businesses to carry on. I think that was what he was saying, whilst calling for tougher quarantine measures, which is exactly what this government imposed as soon as we became aware of the new variant, Mr. Speaker. And I repeat what you have to do if you want to come into this country from abroad. You have to 72 hours before you fly. You have to get a test, Mr. Speaker. You have to have a passenger locator form. You're kicked off the plane if you don't have it. You then have to spend 10 days, Mr. Speaker, in quarantine. If you come from one of the red list countries, Mr. Speaker, you have to go straight into quarantine. And all of this, of course, is to allow us to get on with the vaccination programme. And if it had listened to the right honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, we would still be at the starting blocks, because he wanted to stay in the European Medicines Agency, Mr. Speaker, and said so 4 times from that dispatch box.
There we are. That's the Brexit klaxon card, dangerously close to being played again by Boris Johnson. Really interesting thing about this: Keir Starmer has obviously decided to just keep pushing away at this quarantining and closing the borders. If you look at the polling, so there's a couple of weeks ago, some YouGov polling, I think before the government actually announced what it was doing. Total support for requiring travellers to the UK to quarantine alone in a hotel for 10 days. 87% of voters altogether, 91% of Tory voters, 86% of Labour voters, 90% of Lib Dem, almost exactly the same on Remain and Leave and Men and Women. So Keir Starmer knows he's sort of pushing at whatever the rights and wrongs and the economic or the epidemiological arguments, he knows that overall the public think if we want to stop something coming into the country, we should stop people coming into the country from wherever they're coming from. And so he's sort of putting himself on the side of the great British public and their sense of common sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've sat through a bunch of focus groups last week. Young Remainers and old Brexiteers all agreed emphatically that they like this. I think schools closed, borders open is by some distance the most effective little slogan that Keir Starmer has come up with since he became Labour leader. And they're now doing adverts with that very slogan in red wall seats that they lost to the Conservative Party in 2019. This is a big deal. But interesting, we thought we'd get a Johnson pivot towards Brexit. And to be fair to this government, they were sort of right about this stuff. I remember talking to ministers last year and they said, we don't want to be in this scheme because we'll have to hand our vaccine over to them. They'll move slower than us. And that is duly what...
Lo and behold, that's what's happened. Yeah, that's what's happened. Well, let's see if Keir Starmer raises to the Brexit bait in his fourth question.
Nonsense. Don't let the truth get in the way of a pre-prepared gag. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows I've never said that from this dispatch box or anywhere else, but the truth escapes him. Mr. Speaker, he describes the current arrangements. If they were working, the variant wouldn't be in the country, the single biggest threat to the vaccine system. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to another area where the government's been slow to act, the cladding crisis. This is affecting millions of people, and I can't tell the Prime Minister how anxious and angry people feel about this. It's now 3.5 years since the Grenfell tragedy, which took 72 lives. So can the Prime Minister tell the House and the country why, 3.5 years on, are there still hundreds of thousands of people living in homes with unsafe cladding? 3.5 years on, and why are millions of leaseholders in homes that they can't sell and facing extortionate costs?
Prime Minister.
Just to jump in on that, it was point out that the Labour Party had a vote on this on an opposition day motion earlier this week. But actually, it's the Sunday Times has been campaigning on this for about 12 months, Tim.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's an absolute scandal, frankly. You've got a bunch of people who are being expected to pay for the removal of this dangerous cladding. You know, as Starmer points out, we are years after Grenfell. I know ministers in government who think that the one thing that could sink this government like a stone would be a repeat of Grenfell, when, frankly, they have failed to deal with this issue. Robert Jenrick, the Housing Secretary, is busy bashing away. He can't get the money out of the Treasury, but if they don't sort this out soon, it really is going to be a millstone around their necks. And Starmer's had a good result, got involved on Monday, got some good publicity, and he's having another go.
Yeah, it was telling that they really pushed it as a sort of the big media round on Monday morning rather than talking about the borders question. But let's see if Boris Johnson's got anything to actually answer that question.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in respect to the Honourable Member's last answer, may I advise him to consult YouTube, where he will find an answer. He raises a very important point about cladding and the predicament of some leaseholders, of many leaseholders. And he's absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, this is a problem that needs to be fixed. This government is getting on with it. 95% of the high-rise buildings with unsafe ACM cladding have been, work is either underway, they are either complete or underway to remove that cladding, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate and sympathise with the predicament of leaseholders who are in that situation, but we are working to clear the backlog, and I can tell him that my honourable friend, the Chancellor and the Community Secretary will be coming forward with a full package to address the issue.
How is that? Is that the answer you were looking for there, Tim Shipman?
Well, I mean, a full package. I mean, I think he's said before, coming soon. I mean, we'll wait and see. I mean, the fact is, people around Robert Jenrick were briefing against the Chancellor at the end of last week because they couldn't get the money. So I suspect this will be resolved sometime around the budget, which is in 4 weeks' time. So they're arguing now over what money goes where, and I suspect this will be part of that settlement. But it's going to have to be good.
Well, let's see if it satisfies Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, whatever the Prime Minister claims being done isn't working. Because this is the situation. Through no fault of their own, huge numbers of people, especially leaseholders, are stuck in the middle. They are living in unsafe homes. They can't sell, and they're being asked to foot the bill. That's the situation that they are in. Take, for example, Will Martin. He's a doctor who's got a flat in Sheffield. He's been spending his days on the front line fighting COVID in the NHS. He spends his nights worrying about the £52,000 bill that he now has to pay for fire safety repairs. He doesn't want future promises, Prime Minister. He doesn't want to hear that it's all been sorted when he knows that it hasn't. He wants to know here and now, will he or will he not have to pay that £52,000 bill?
Mr. Speaker, we're determined that no leaseholder should have to pay for the unaffordable costs of fixing safety defects that they didn't cause under no fault of their own. And that's why, in addition to the £1.6 billion we're putting in to remove the ACM and the UPL cladding, we are also setting up and have set up a £1 billion building safety fund, which has already processed over almost 3,000 claims. And I sympathise very much with the gentleman Dr. Martin, that he mentions, and I hope very much that his particular case can be addressed in the course of the forthcoming package that will be produced by my right honourable friends.
That was sort of same question, same answer, really. Wait for the budget and Keir Starmer.
Yeah. So he's gone far enough to suggest that they, will deal with it, and if they don't, that will then come back and bite him.
And probably the opposition day motion this week and the pressure that put on lots of Tory MPs might have helped to focus minds a little bit in the Treasury in number 10. Let's go back and hear from Keir Starmer. Then last question from Keir Starmer at PMQs.
There are thousands and thousands of people in exactly the same position. I spoke to leaseholders caught in the middle of this on Monday. One of them was Hayley. She's already gone bankrupt, Mr. Prime Minister. She's 27. She bought a flat, she's lost it, she's now bankrupt. It's too late for her. Those leaseholders that I spoke to had 3 very simple asks. This is what they want: immediate upfront funding for unsafe blocks, a deadline of next year to make buildings safe, and protection for leaseholders. We put those forward for a vote on Monday. The Prime Minister says he's determined to do something about it. What did he do? He ordered his MPs to abstain. If the Prime Minister is serious about moving this forward and ending this injustice, will he commit today to those simple asks from leaseholders?
Mr. Speaker, we're getting on with the job of helping leaseholders across the country by remediating their buildings. And in addition to the funds I've already mentioned, I can tell him that we're also introducing a £30 million fund to install alarms and other interim measures. And we're making it very clear to the mortgage industry that they should be supporting people living in such accommodation, and and making it clear to all sectors of the industry that people living in such homes should not be tied up in the whole EWS1 process. And that will benefit about 450,000 homeowners, Mr. Speaker. I think he's right to raise the problem, but we're getting on with addressing it, Mr. Speaker. And we're getting on with addressing the fundamental problem that afflicts this country, and that is the COVID pandemic. And that's why I'm pleased that we've now done 10 million first vaccinations across the country. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, had we listened to the right honourable gentleman, we would be stuck at go, because he's shaking his head, but he can check the record. Several times he said that this country should remain in the European Medicines Agency. And if he wishes to on a point of order, to correct me, because he said it was wrong just now, I think he should study the record and he'll find that is exactly what he did. We want to get this country safe again. We want schools to come back. Mr. Speaker, he continues to refuse to say that schools aren't safe, Mr. Speaker. And on the contrary, he spends his time looking at Labour focus groups who tell him that he should stop sitting on the fence.
And Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker,
no, Prime Minister, just in fairness, I think we've got to be somewhere near the question that was asked, and I don't want you to go around the world answering every problem and issue. There's a lot more questions. Who's going to allow you to do that? And the first one's coming, Marco Longi.
I did wonder, Tim Shipman, when Boris Johnson going to get around to this story in The Guardian about the Labour Party focus groups, and which revealed that, surprise, we sit through focus groups on Times Radio. You've been doing them for the Sunday Times. Voters think Keir Starmer sits on the fence, and they've been talking about they're going to wrap themselves in the flag. And unfortunately, Boris Johnson took such a long time to get there. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, cut him off.
Well, often with those roundup answers at the end, one calls it a greatest hits of Boris Johnson's life. That wasn't so much a greatest hits as a sort of rather dreadful compilation album, which didn't really hang together in any meaningful way. I did think it was rather bold of Keir Starmer to have a go at Boris Johnson for asking his MPs to abstain on a vote, which is the very thing that those focus groups are telling the Labour leader is a problem for him, because he's done that several times as well. One might say that he was adopting Johnson's preferred approach of have one's cake and eat it there.
But it's also
replete with mild hypocrisy on both sides, I would say.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that on the big issue that he abstained on previously, was that on Brexit? It was on it, but it was on like a big government vote. Whereas on what was happening this week, the Labour Party rightly putting the issue of cladding and the borders on the table and having a debate and then a vote at the end, but it has no impact at all on the outcome. The big giveaway, there's clearly a lot of money coming to deal with this cladding problem, is when Boris Johnson started quoting particular. Was it UZ or
EWSI, Matt? I mean,
EWSI.
Yeah,
he's clearly
I don't know what that means, but he has clearly mugged up. Which is
he's mugged up. He's had a brief. He said, "How do we get a grip on this?" And so, yeah, if there was more proof that you needed, that there was an announcement on this coming very soon. Boris Johnson showing off that he's read a brief on it is probably the best possible example.
I was listening to his answers very closely there, because he has been known to blurt the policy out by mistake when he's sort of defending himself. He didn't quite do it today, but
no, as we have seen that before. Yeah, and Keir Starmer not quite wrapping himself in a flag. Maybe he's going to save that. Tim Shipman, thanks so much for that. PMQs Unpacked.